We're going to talk about moods. Now, I have to admit that my mood actually is not that great tonight because I have to go home tomorrow. I know. And you see, that means I have to go home to a country without meat pies. No flat white. No Marmite. I know, it's shocking, isn't it? You see, if you give Marmite to a Canadian, they think it's a pesticide. And you see, and you thought Canada was a developed country. So that we have to just go back and tell them about what happens here. So we're going to talk about moods, and just to remind you that we have got loads of resources on our website, so you can go there any time of the day or night and not wake me up. And there's lots of stuff there. So we're going to talk about mood self-assessment, and there's a lot of information on self-assessment on the website. Okay, and so in this session we're going to talk about specifically about mood disorders. And so the DVD that Joshua was showing, this DVD is an expansion of what I'm going to tell you just now. Okay, so I'm going to give you a short version. This is the longer version. So this is a tool I created in my clinic for self-assessment because I found I got a higher accuracy rate and a greater buy-in from the patient when they had time to go home and think about the diagnosis. So they would come in and tell me this is how they're feeling. I said, well, it could be clinical depression. Go home, watch the video with your spouse, because then when we got the spouse involved, accuracy went way up. And then well, it's very hard to assess yourself, especially, we'll talk about guys during the presentation. So then they then they had time to think about it, and then they would come back and say, this describes me or it doesn't. So this is a diagnostic tool. Also, it's a very easy way to help explain to someone if they need medicines. Okay, that sort of was the reason to demystify mood disorders. So that's the purpose of that video. So there are still a few left out there. And then I'll tell you about the burnout one when we get to it. But just to remind you, because it's been so long since I explained this to you, do you remember how many parts there are to humans? Can you count? Yes. Do you remember what they sort of correspond to? So we're going to talk. This session is about hardware. Okay, just about how to understand mental health and how to do a self-assessment. Now, the easiest way to understand the physical conditions that interfere with how you think, feel, and relate to others, okay, so we're talking hardware issues, physical hardware issues in this session, is to compare it to vision disorders, okay? That's the easiest comparison because vision, we all understand, and it's easy to compare. So we know that if you have blurred vision, then you're probably short-sighted, and there are glasses to correct that, okay? So everyone understands that. That is not controversial. Well, in a mood disorder, you have blurred thinking. You have blurred thinking, which means you have a disorder of your mood, which I'll explain in more detail, and there are medicines to fix it. So the medicines for mood disorders would be equivalent to glasses. Blurred vision, blurred thinking. Okay, so keep that as a sort of a context for what we're doing. But because there's a lot of misunderstanding in our culture about mood disorders, and so that's why people tend to be, depressed people are misunderstood. And that's because depression's not a visible problem. You see, if you come in with crutches, someone would help you with the door and there'd be some sympathy and assistance. But if you come in with depression, that's very easily concealed. And if you told someone, they'd go, what do you have to be depressed about? Okay? So that's why what we want to do is explain, I want you to understand mood disorder so well that never again will a depressed person be misunderstood. Okay, or anyone with a mood disorder. But because they're invisible conditions, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. Now, every culture has a different level of stigma about mental health problems, and it's all different. And so Kathy and I visited a lot of different countries, and so we see many different cultures and how they handle or approach or think about mood disorders. But we actually when we were on holidays one time, we actually found a culture where there's no stigma at all, it seems, to mood disorders, and they have their own cafe. So that's the Depresso Cafe, if you're too far back. And we were so impressed. In fact, I remember we walked past it, and I said, stop, Kathy, you must take a photo. This is amazing, the Depresso Cafe. So this is in Bratislava, down in the Slovak Republic. So this is kind of an obscure spot. But I presumed, I didn't ask anyone, I presumed that this is actually a coffee shop for depressed people. And you can go in there with all your depressed friends, be as depressed as you want, and there's no stigma at all. Okay, that's just normal. And so I was hoping that this chain would actually come to Canada. And because I just think it would completely revolutionize our approach to mental health. Now I want to explain to you what a mood disorder is. Now your brain has hundreds of control centers, so we've depicted a few there. And most of the control centers are not voluntary. Okay, they're automatic. You have no control over them. So that'd be like your pupil size. Okay, that's an automatic function. You have no control over that. But your mood is something that's voluntarily controlled, much like your limbs. Okay, so your motor function, your limbs voluntarily control, and so is your mood. And we're going to talk about mood disorders, but the easiest way to understand how your mood control center works is first to compare it to the movement control center, because that's a little easier to imagine. So let's talk about, you want to move a limb. So what has to happen to give you the ability to move a limb? Well, somewhere in your head is what I call the intention control center, or where you form intent, where you make a decision to move a limb. And so if your nerve cells are talking to each other sufficiently, then it sends a signal saying, okay, he wants to move his left arm. So it sends a signal to the movement control center, which you can see there. And then the movement control center determines which nerve, where the signal should go so it arrives at the correct muscle. And then if it does, then the muscle moves. So what happens to your ability to move a limb if something interferes with the chain of command from intent, where you decide you want to do it, to the movement control center, to the actual limb? What happens to your ability to move a limb if something interferes with that? Well, you don't move, right? Can you think of a common medical condition where you can't move a limb? Well, a stroke. Okay, so that's like it's a nerve cell injury that blocks the chain of command. Now, your mood control center works very much the same. So let's say, rather than move your limb, change your mood. Okay, so let's say you're working very hard and you want to stop thinking about work at lunchtime and think about the beach for lunch, over your lunch hour, and just relax and picture your holidays and what you're going to be doing and feel the breeze. And, so you picture it and kind of enjoy it. So in that case, you want to change what you're thinking about and change your mood. Okay? So the key to changing your mood is to change what you're thinking about, right? Your mood is a direct result of what you're thinking. So to change your mood, you have to change what you're thinking. So if you're having a problem with mood control, that means you're having a problem with thought control. So a mood disorder is a loss of thought control, because if you want to, let's say, turn off work, turn on beach at noon, then in your intention control center, you form intent. You say, okay, I want to stop thinking about this and start thinking about that. So it sends a signal to the mood control center at noon saying, stop work, turn on beach. And if all your nerve cells are working properly, you can. In other words, you can change what you're thinking, which will change your mood. But if you have a mood disorder, or if there's something interfering with that chain of command in the nerve cell function, you can want to stop thinking about work as really, really, really hard, but if that nerve pathway isn't intact, you can't. Okay, so a mood disorder, depression, anxiety, and bipolar, those are the mood disorders, they are caused by a loss of thought control. Because if you could control your thoughts, your mood wouldn't drop into depression. So a mood disorder is a loss of thought control. It's that simple. That's all a mood disorder is. If you can't control your thoughts, your mood drifts into directions you don't want but can't stop. Okay? Now, let's take the mood control center and sort of make it look like a gauge. Okay? So the green arrow is what your mood is like at any given time. So it's always moving about depending on your day. Because it's normal to have ups and downs depending on circumstances. That's absolutely normal. But what is normal mood? How do you tell if you've strayed outside the normal mood or if you're still in the normal mood? Because we have no test. Like, there isn't a blood test. There's not a gauge. You can't. We used to have mood rings, right? They're not accurate. Okay? But you can't put something on your, oh yeah, my mood. There's no measurement tool. So I had to come up with my own measurement tool to tell who needed medicines and who didn't, who was in the normal range and who needed to see a doctor. So I had to come up with my own definition of normal mood. So here's what normal mood is. You can compare yourself. Normal mood is being relaxed, content, concentrating, in control of your thoughts, with a clear mind, consistently. Now, I don't know anyone like that. But that's what normal mood is. Okay, so you compare yourself. Now, as long as you stay in the purple zone, you can control your thoughts, which means all the nerve cells are connecting and working fine to allow you to turn things on and turn off, okay? But as soon as you leave the purple zone in either direction, you can't shut your mind off. And if you can't shut your mind off, your moods are going to go in directions you can't stop, which is a mood disorder, because you can't stop it. Now, where do mood disorders come from? Well, they run in families, like really strongly in families. In fact, they run in most of our families. Like, this is not a rare condition. This is really common. But you could challenge me and say, how can that be true when we know that traumatic life events can trigger a mood disorder? Which, of course, is true, like PTSD. Traumatic event, it can cause major mood damage. So how can that both be true? Well, here's how. You genetically inherit a predisposition or a risk for a mood disorder. The same with any other genetic condition. But whether or not you ever get symptoms depends on your life circumstances. So you can have a very mild genetic predisposition for a mood problem, but never get symptoms ever, or only get it if you're sufficiently stressed, which brings out that tendency. Or you can be born with a very strong genetic predisposition and get symptoms very, very young without any precipitating stress. Okay, so it's an interplay of genetic predisposition and life circumstances. So it's both. Okay, so that there's an interplay between the two. Now, how common are mood disorders? Well, you know, we have no tests, so we can't screen the population accurately like we can for vision disorders or thyroid disorders. So all we can do is do a best guess based on interview and surveys, so it's subjective. It's not fully accurate. But we know at least 10% of the population is depressed. But that really only counts the people who have identified themselves and gone for help. But we know that 80% of people who are struggling with their mood are mild, and they're functioning, and they haven't gone for help, so they're undiagnosed and untreated. 80%. So we're only treating 20% of the people who need treatment because the others are mild. So I call them the walking wounded, because they're not bad enough to go for help, but they're struggling. So their mood's slowly dropping, but they're managing, and they feel there's some other cause, they can blame it on work or something, but their mood is slipping. Okay, so if you include that group, it's 20% of the population. So that's an incredibly high number. Last year in Ontario, where I live, there was an article in our newspaper, the national newspaper, that said 20% of the incoming first-year university class, 20% in Ontario universities, 20% of the students coming in have mental health problems, and they're all lining up at the counseling office. 20%. And those are the high achievers. So I'm sure your culture is the same. And so this is very, very common if you include everybody who's struggling. Okay, but remember, and that's why we have these seminars, is so that a person who's struggling will say, oh, maybe it's this, and I could actually get that fixed. Okay, so that's why we do these public events, and that's why I created the videos, and it's all in my book, and it's on my website, so that people can assess themselves, because your doctor's not going to, he's not going to suggest it. You have to learn how to complain accurately, that's what we're going to do in this session. I'm teaching you how to complain accurately. So you have to raise the issue to him. He's not going to find it in you. So that's why, because the earlier we start treatment, the faster is the recovery. It's just that simple, okay? So we know 10 to 20% of the population. Now, we know that it's slightly more common in women. Now, why is that? Well, it's genetic. I mean, there's some things, like heart disease is more common in men than women. And so, I mean, there are genetic differences. Pregnancy is more common in women. And so that we know that there are genetics, there are certain conditions that travel in the genders. So it's slightly more common in women. But if you include now both genders and all of the mental health diagnoses, not just depression, one person in five, at some point in their life, their mood will drop out of the normal range and need medical help. Okay, 1 person in 5. So we're talking astronomically high numbers. In fact, in my experience, I think there's only 2 conditions in medicine that are more common than mood disorders, and that would be short-sightedness, which is 40% of the population, and obesity, which is probably 99% of the population. So apart from those 2, and we're talking, it's in all of our families, and it's everywhere, okay? It's a huge, huge problem. Now, if you talk about men now, The risk in men is slightly lower, not a lot lower, but there is a slightly lower incidence in men. And it's genetic. So, but there's only one genetic difference between men and women. Men have a Y chromosome that women don't have. And so there's something about the Y chromosome that seems to lower the incidence or protect men from mood disorders to some extent. And so I've studied this for a long time because I had a clinic for a long time. And so this is actually what I learned. And it's what I discovered that could explain the difference in incidence. You see, in my experience, men, the Y chromosome is missing the gene called insight. So it's very hard for a man to assess themselves. So I had a rule in my clinic that I wouldn't see a man by themselves. They had to come in with a woman. Just pick a woman who knows you really well. Because the man would always say, well, at a certain point he would say, I'm fine. And I'd just say, okay, tell me all about him. Okay? But actually, it's quite uncommon for a man to come into my office. That women would, of course, come more often. And they would come differently. So a woman would come to my office and she would say, I have a problem. I know it's all my fault. Can you help me? So then she was open for assistance. If a man came to my office, which was less frequently, he would present differently. He would just say, I have a problem. Can you fix her? So it's just different. Treating men was a little bit different. Now, schizophrenia is not split personality. Okay? Now, I'm telling you this because we must stop using that term incorrectly. Because I keep hearing people who say, well, you know, I don't know if it's going to rain. I just feel a little schizophrenic about should I take an umbrella or should I not? Or should I wear a hat? Should I not? You know, that's not. Yes, it's true that schizophrenia, the root word is two people. Okay? But that has nothing to do with this disorder. I don't know who ever came up with the name of that disorder for this condition. Okay, schizophrenia is a chemical imbalance in the orientation part of the brain. Remember I showed you all these different control centers? There's mood disorder, movement, and orientation. So in schizophrenia, there is disorientation. And so it's hard for them to know what's real, what's imaginary, what's a hallucination, what's an audible voice. You know, they're not sure what's a dream and what's really happening. Okay, so there's a disorienting. So it's a different condition with different medicines. But just don't ever use the word incorrectly again. It does not mean you're indecisive or or of two minds. Okay. Now, the big problem in mood disorders, of course, is we have no test. Because if we had a test, an X-ray or blood test or something, then we could screen the population. It wouldn't be controversial. If we had a test, no one would be, we wouldn't be arguing all the time about who should be on medicines. Like I get emails all the time. Even yesterday, I got an email here from someone in this country who is just confused. Like, should I be taking medicine? Shouldn't I? Because some people say too many people are on medicines, and then medicines are toxic, and what? I'm all confused. Now, if we had a test, there'd be no confusion at all. And you see, there's this rumor that antidepressants are a conspiracy of big pharmaceutical companies to get everybody on medicines to make money and to say that a down mood, which is normal, should be treated so they can make money. Okay, it's a conspiracy. Now, have you ever heard of a company that makes glasses accused of conspiring that 40% of the population are wearing glasses and that it was just a conspiracy to convince people that short-sightedness was in fact normal and it shouldn't be treated? They just suggested treatment just to make money. Okay? There wouldn't. There's no controversy about that because we have a test. But in mental health, there's still controversy because we don't have a test. And so I want to help you understand that this is not controversial at all. This is pretty simple. And I want to give you all the tools to understand it. Okay, now, if we talk about depression, so that's when the green arrow slides into the red zone and it leaves the normal range. Well, how do you tell when you've left the normal range into the red zone? Because we have no test. So the normal range, of course, you can be happy, sad, and fluctuate, but how do you tell when you've now fluctuated outside the normal range? Which to me was very important because I had to figure out who needed medications and who just needed counseling and time, and time would help. So I had to learn how to separate discouragement. So discouragement is when you're at the far end of the normal range down. Okay, so discouragement is the far end of the far left side of the purple zone. Okay, that's discouragement. That's a normal down that we all have. But how do you tell when you've gone from discouragement to depression, which is when you slip into the clinical disorder zone? Okay, so I've actually listed, here's how you separate the two. Here's how you tell if you need to see a doctor or a counselor or time. Okay? This is the tools that are in our self-assessment kit. So in discouragement, it comes and goes. And something happens. There's a defined event, there's a triggering cause, and you feel down, but it comes and goes. But one of the key things is you can enjoy other things, so that you may be down about work, but you're okay at home, or down about home, but okay at work. So it affects part of your life, not all of your life. Okay, so that's really important. There's a clear-cut cause, and it affects part of your life. Then, if spiritually stable means life is worth living, you know, I'm still, you know, I still feel intact, I feel loved by others, but this part of my life is disturbing or painful. But the most important symptoms are you can control your thoughts, which means all those nerve cells are talking to each other. So that's the key, is if you can control your discouragement and turn it on and turn it off, then that means your nerve cells are working fine. And if you can control your thoughts, then you can concentrate. So concentration is a very good measurement tool of thought control. So if you can't concentrate, you're probably having thought control issues, which then could be affecting your mood. So in discouragement, you can concentrate, you can control your thoughts, you can shut it off. It only affects part of your life. And we've all had it. Now, depression is very different. In depression, it's much more prolonged, much more prolonged. Now, I found in my clinic, after a person made a full recovery, I would ask them, when's the last time you felt this well? And that would give me just a rough idea of how long their mood had been dropping. And you know what the average length of time that a person has been dropping in retrospect. Now, they didn't notice it at the time, but after they made a full recovery, they would look back and say, wow, I haven't felt this well in. And so, you know what the average length of time? It was 20 years. 20 years. Now, they had only become aware of it usually for 5 years, because it takes that long to get an appointment in Canada. But so in other words, they had been dropping for a long, long, long time and then crashed. And that's when they came for help. But if we could get to people at the beginning of this long, slow slide, you recover faster and don't waste so much time struggling, and your life is difficult. So that's why we do these kinds of events, is if you can assess yourself or a loved one early in the slide, why wait for the crash? You know, the parallel is, we don't wait and give glasses to people after they have a white cane. You know, we treat it as soon as the symptoms start, right? So I'm pleading with people, start treating early. Like people say, well, you know, I don't want to kill myself, I don't need treatment. Well, no, that's a very rare symptom. What we're looking for is you can't shut off the negative thinking. That's what we're looking for, okay? So very prolonged. So there's a loss of interest in everything. It's not just part of your life's affected, all of your life's affected. You know, you can't really get enjoyment out of anything that you used to. And there's a sense of hopelessness. You feel alone, you feel cut off from everybody and cut off from God, that life has lost its meaning and purpose. You feel disconnected from even people who are close to you. And then, of course, most importantly, you can't shut your mind off. In other words, you can't turn off the thoughts you don't want. And if you can't do that, you can't concentrate. So the two most valuable symptoms is, if you're feeling really down or anxious, is, can I turn it off? Can I concentrate? Okay? And now this is over long periods of time. This is not like 2 weeks. This is over months or years. Okay? These are long periods of time. So that's how you do your own self-assessment. So that information's on the video, it's in my book, it's on the website. We just put it everywhere because we want people to assess themselves. And the whole idea is, you assess yourself, you write down all the symptoms that you recognize out of these lists, and you hand that to your doctor. That's complaining accurately. And he appreciates that, okay, because he can be more accurate faster. But the most valuable screening question that I use in my clinic, and you can use for yourself or if you're trying to help a loved one, it's this. Can you shut your mind off? That's a very useful screening question for anyone who's depressed or anxious or having mood swings. Can you shut it off? Now, in depression, it has a wide variety of possible symptoms. And so that's why people have said, well, I don't want to kill myself, I'm not depressed. Well, being suicidal is a very rare, uncommon symptom of depression, but negative thinking, they all have it, okay? So like some people oversleep, some people can't sleep. Some people overeat, some people can't eat. Okay, so there's a huge variety, but what they all have in common is they can't shut it off. Okay, so that's what you watch for. Okay, so and start treating when it's mild. Don't wait for it to be disabling. Now, anxiety disorder is in fact just the flip side of the coin of depression. Biochemically, it's identical. It's the same nerve cell malfunction. It's the same loss of control. But instead of the unwanted thoughts being of the down, sad, negative, it's more worry, fear. But it's the same. I mean, they're both unwanted negative thoughts. So it's just some people have more anxiety than depression. Some people have more depression than anxiety. But every depressed person has some anxious symptoms. Every anxious person has some depressed symptoms. So there's a huge overlap. So to a physician, the treatment's the same. The same medications help correct that imbalance. But to a counselor, the treatment would be different. There would be a different approach to both. Okay? But these are very common conditions. And in fact, anxiety, I feel, is more common than depression. And it fits the three-part model perfectly. So I have a whole video just on how to deal with fear and worry. I think there's one left on the table out there. Because there are physical conditions, which we're talking about now, that makes you very prone to anxious thoughts that you can't turn off. That's physical. But there are spiritual conditions that make you anxious. And then if you come from a very anxious family, that's your programming. So if you have really anxious parents, then that becomes the culture you were raised in. So if your parents just said, no, in our family we worry about everything. Everything's a threat. Everything's scary. Worry about everything. Well, that's your normal. That's your default. And so if you come from a very anxious family. So in the video, we talk about how to deal with all three. So in this session, we're just talking about the physical conditions that you treat with medications, okay? But there's a whole lot more to it. That's in the video. There's one left there, but you can always order it. Now, another very common emotional problem is burnout. And this is how you spot someone in burnout. This is what they look like. They have an ashen look and a smoky smell. That's how you spot burnout. But burnout's very common, of course. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because the symptoms of burnout and the symptoms of depression overlap a great deal, and they're easily confused. They're easily mixed up. But if you mix them up and misdiagnose, you can suffer for a whole lot longer than you should. Okay? So burnout is a form of discouragement. Okay? So it's within the normal range. So in burnout, you're in the far left side of that purple zone. Okay? So burnout is a common condition, but all your nerve cells are connected. You can shut it off, you can control your thoughts, but there's a part of your life that's difficult. But I have met so many people in burnout, but they can't shut their mind off, they can't concentrate. It's gone on for a very, very long time, and it's not lifting. Burnout should lift with time. And so those people actually have clinical depression, but they choose to call it burnout. Well, one, because they don't know the difference between the two. The second is, burnout is a much more socially acceptable label. Because, you know, if you're feeling really down, you're going to pick burnout over depression. Because if you tell someone, oh, I think I'm burned out, you're going to get a hug. But if you say, I'm depressed, what do you have to be depressed about? You know, just pull up your socks, just stop it. Okay, see, so burnout, there's a put down, depression, there's a put down, burnout, there's a hug. So of course you pick burnout when the symptoms are so similar, but the treatment is so different. So I've just run into people who said they've been burnout for years and years, and I thought, that doesn't seem right. And then eventually they discovered that no, they're clinically depressed, took their medicines, recovered. So why put up with burnout for years if you can actually recover in a few weeks? So that's why I'm mentioning it. So I have a video just on burnout, is how to do your self-assessment, all the different characteristics of burnout and how to separate the two. So we have videos on everything that we could possibly think of that's a common problem. Now, let's graph mood over time. Okay, so if we take the, if we graph mood over time from left to right, then this is that's the depiction of the normal mood. Okay, so happy, sad, but you can shut your mind off, you can control your thoughts. Now, in depression, your mood drops into the red zone, and you get stuck in negative thinking. You can't stop. And then usually it's a very mild drop and then a crash. Okay? Now, what's the most common age group that people enter the red zone? What's the most common age group when symptoms begin? Adolescence, that's right. There's something about puberty that seems to bring out a genetic predisposition. Now, what is our society's common response to teenagers who begin to get symptoms of depression or any of the mood problems? What's sort of the, on average, that we respond to a teenager starting with those symptoms? It's just a phase. You know, that's just normal adolescence. But do teenagers kill themselves? Yes, well, that's not a normal phase. That's an illness. So I'm pleading with people, especially those who have teenagers at home or you work with teenagers, watch for mood disorders because that's the age that they begin. And the sooner we start treatment, the sooner they recover. And why have them wait 20 years and then come 20 years later when they crash? But here's the other big risk. Teenagers will treat their moods. They will not let their moods go untreated. And what do you think they will do if they're having trouble with bad thoughts that they can't stop? What do you think they're going to do? They're not going to leave it untreated. They're going to do what their friends are doing about the same problem, because it's very common. And what do you think their friends are doing to treat their moods? Substances. And so, the substances will help temporarily, right? So you get stoned, and the anxiety stops for a little while. But as soon as you sober up, the anxiety's right back. So what are you going to do next? You need another hit. Okay, so then you get hooked, so then you've got a substance problem on top of a mood problem. So in my clinic, well, everyone who came to my clinic with a substance problem were just treating their moods. They were self-medicating their mood problem. And so I'm just encouraging people, if we can get the legitimate treatment to teenagers before they get hooked on substances, then we're going to save a lot of lives. And I understand your country is wanting to follow our uncivilized country by legalizing these things. Because our Prime Minister wants us all stoned all the time. Good for taxes. Now, it's important, here's another thing that we need to talk about that affects mood. But the reason we should be talking about menopause is because of the current interest in global warming. Now, we know that any major mood change can trigger a mood change. So any hormonal change can trigger a mood change. Okay, any hormonal so that's true monthly, but that's also true postpartum, big hormonal change there, and risk for mood change, and menopause. Okay, so any of the major hormonal events can trigger or magnify a pre-existing mood problem. And so menopause, because there's a big hormonal change, it can trigger a mood disorder or magnify a really mild one so it's not mild anymore. And so it's a very important age group to be watching for mood disorders emerging, like depression, anxiety emerging. And so the reason I mention that is I've seen just too many women who just say, well, you know, I'm in the menopause, I'm supposed to feel terrible. You know, it's just, you know, it's like a sentence that I have to live out. But if you can't shut your mind off with negative thinking, then the menopause could have triggered a very treatable condition. You can treat the menopause and feel a whole lot better while you're going through that change. Okay, so that's why I'm mentioning it. So don't put up with it. In other words, compare yourself to this checklist. If you have the mood symptoms, treat it. Don't just chalk it up to menopause. Now let's look at the next most common mood, and that's when you leave the purple zone into the yellow zone, the opposite side of depression. So you can't shut your mind off as soon as you leave the purple zone, but instead of that down, sad, negative, worry thinking, you can't shut your mind off, but it's all you feel very pumped, driven, energized, your mind's racing, you're just go, 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 go. You could be very creative, very, very chatty. You could be very, very entertaining briefly. Because what goes up must come down. And so that's what we call mania or hypomania, which just means a little bit of mania. And so that's drivenness. So your mind's going very, very, very fast. It's push, 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 push. Don't slow down, don't slow down. And you've got a million things you want to do, and you stay up all night working creatively on ideas and projects and research, and you just can't slow down. Like you can't sleep. It's just, there's this motor inside pushing you. And I had one of my patients, delightful lady, who had this problem, and she couldn't sleep, so she went up and got stuff done. Now, most of the ladies who had this problem, they would do laundry and cleaning. So this lady, after she'd finished the laundry and cleaning, she went outside during the night with her power mower and cut the lawn with a torch. I said, don't the neighbors complain? She's just very ambitious. So everything got done. She probably did other people's lawns just because she had extra time. So it's drivenness, okay? You don't have to be happy. You have to be driven. okay? And so that you can be very irritable, in fact. Personally, I think this is the source of many road rage episodes. Because if a person's very driven, they're going to be very impatient, and if something happens on the road that irritates them, they're going to like overreact. So you don't have to be happy to be on the upswing. You have to be driven. So let's graph mood over time. So that's from left to right. That's the normal up and down of mood. But in this condition, you have peaks and troughs, or you have a north pole and a south pole. And so that's why it's called bipolar disorder. There's a north pole and a south pole. Now, in the south pole, the symptoms are identical to depression. And in the north pole, you have this drivenness. Now, at which pole do you think a person is most likely to go for help? Which pole? South pole, that's right. Now, if a person goes to the doctor with south pole symptoms, what do you think they're likely to be diagnosed with? Depression, that's right, and they'll get depression treatment. The problem is, if you give antidepressant treatment to a person with bipolar, you can magnify the swings quite dramatically, which is very unpleasant. And so that's why it's so important to learn how to complain to your doctor accurately. You see, 20% of depressions have this pattern. It says 20% of all depressions, which of course is very, very, very common, 20% of all depressions are bipolar. But they're mild. The swings are mild and often imperceptible to, like, unless you ask specific questions. Because a person with mild swinging, they consider the upswing their normal because it's very pleasant. So they consider that their normal or their desirable mood, even though they can't sleep. They're very driven. So what your doctor needs to know, if you're experiencing depression, you're going to your doctor, what he needs to know is your mood pattern over the last few years, not just the last few weeks. Okay? He needs to know, do you ever have episodes of drivenness followed by a crash into depression? Because most people, I've only had one person in my entire career ever complain about feeling too good. That's what he came in, a man. He even came in and said, look, there's something wrong, I'm feeling too good. Once in 25 years, once, okay? Everyone else came in on the downside. So you need to assess, do you have the swing pattern? Also, the most common reason for medication failure, because I only saw the medication failures in my clinic. I had a clinic where the family doctors sent the medication failures to see me. And the most common reason for a failure of antidepressant in a depressed person is that they were bipolar and never told their doctor. That's the number one reason why the antidepressant didn't work, because they were misdiagnosed, because they didn't know how to complain accurately, and they never told the doctor they were swinging, because they weren't aware they were swinging, because they considered their upswing their normal. So that's why it's so important. You've got to hand the doctor your mood pattern to get the right treatment, okay? Because many of you may actually be on antidepressants and you're very frustrated that you're not getting better, and it may just be because you have these driven episodes and crashes, but you weren't aware of it, so of course you never mentioned it. So assess yourself that way, okay? Now, spiritual influences. So remember, there's the three circles, so we're talking about hardware, but there are spiritual influences on the way you think. Now, I was completely unaware of this until I admitted one of my patients to hospital, and on my daily rounds, I was talking to her about her moods, and in the middle of my conversation, her eyes glaze over, a voice comes out of her and says, "Leave her alone, she's ours." Yeah, what are you going to do with that? Okay? There's no pill for that. So I had to learn that there are spiritual influences as well, and so I had to incorporate that into my treatment. So that's why in the second section of my book is how do you deal with these spiritual realities, because I mean, that is very real, and there's this big intertwining with mental health issues. So that's in the second part of my book. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, as far as treatments go, well, I mean, some doctors do counseling, support, instruction, but doctors really, their role is to give you the right medicine and help you recover with your hardware problem. Okay, that's really their role. I wouldn't expect your doctor to be doing counseling unless it's their special interest. But all of you can be involved in helping other people and yourself, of course. But here are all the ways that you can help. So I don't want you to feel that, well, I can't write a prescription, so I can't help. No, you can be really helpful because all of you can be encouraging. Just with a little bit of information you got today. Because you can help, because now you understand mood disorders better than most people in the population. You actually are going to understand more about mental health than most people in this country, certainly than in Canada. And so you can actually say the right thing to someone and encourage them about to progress through treatment, how to tell if they need to see a doctor. The pills aren't a conspiracy of big pharma. You can be very encouraging to people in their process. Instruction, just the little bit you learned today. The instruction like, if you can't shut your mind off, you might need to see a doctor. I mean, that one sentence can change someone's life. Save their marriage. Save their parenting, family. Exercise is very helpful, like physical exercise. That's very helpful for lifting mood. Now, it doesn't correct the chemical imbalance, but it does assist in the recovery process. So physical exercise is very good. Therapy is counseling. I think everybody should be in counseling. Like, we're all struggling with something. We did that in the last session, and we all have baggage, and counselors are in counseling. So I just think that, open your mind that counseling could really improve your quality of life. And prayer is really helpful because it's really hard to pray when you're depressed. But if you've tried all those things in a loved one or yourself, and you're still not getting better, well, that's when you start to go through the checklist of symptoms for depression. So that will help. That'll be very helpful for discouragement, but it won't completely resolve depression. But if you're working with someone who's depressed, that's very helpful. But if they're not improving, then maybe they need to see a doctor. But keep in mind, medications are very, very helpful, but they don't replace all of that. You don't say, well, you're on medicines now, so we're not going to talk to you anymore. You don't need a counselor. And we're not going to encourage you, and you're on your own. You add medicines to all these good things. Okay, so we find we get the best results with medicines are taken with counseling and a supportive family environment or a supportive church environment, wherever you find your social connection. People do better who are socially connected, seeing a counselor, and on medicines if they need it. Okay, that's the best. And so with this little bit we've talked about today, no longer do we have to shun or misunderstand depressed people, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and they feel so ashamed. Like the people I saw in my office, I would say, well, why don't you talk to someone? Say, well, no, I'm the only one. I can't possibly admit it. I'm so ashamed. Well, I mean, you don't have to be ashamed of being short-sighted and wearing glasses. So to me, mood disorder is the same as a vision disorder. There's no shame in that at all. Now, if we were to talk about treatments, antidepressants is what we use for depression. And the antidepressants, what they do is they correct the chemical imbalance. They raise the level of serotonin and other things to give you back a clear mind and restore your mood to normal, because it restores your thought control. Now, antidepressants are not habit-forming narcotics. Okay? I mean, I hear about this all the time. Yesterday, I got this email about, I know I shouldn't be on antidepressants because I was told they're damaging to my brain. Okay, these are not habit-forming narcotics, and you don't have to take my word for it. Have you ever heard of anyone arrested for trafficking in antidepressants? It's never happened. Because why would anyone on the street pay money for a drug that gives them a clear mind? There's no attraction there at all. Plus, it'll take like 3 weeks to work. Okay, so this has no street value. Okay, it's not habit-forming at all. Now, it's true that if you stop it abruptly, you'll get withdrawal symptoms. And so that's why people say, well, I guess I'm addicted. It's a narcotic because they get withdrawal symptoms. Well, no. Just that if you stop something abruptly, don't do that. Okay, you get withdrawal symptoms. So antidepressants restore thought control. It just gives you back control of your thoughts, and then you can choose to think whatever you want. Okay, it doesn't control your, like people say, well, am I going to lose my personality? Well, no, it just gives you back the personality that you started with before you got depressed. It just brings you back to your normal. It doesn't give you an artificial personality. It just gives you back the one you're supposed to have. Now, in bipolar disorder, there are medications that just prevent the swings. It just sort of brings the swings back into the normal range. And so there are many different antidepressants and stabilizers. You have to fiddle to get the one that suits you best. But here's sort of a diagram of what happens in your brain with antidepressants. So on the left, these are two nerve cells talking to each other. And nerve cells talk to each other by squirting little droplets of chemicals across a little gap. And so in your brain, in your mood control center, they squirt out these little droplets of serotonin, and then they jump across the gap and they attach to the next nerve cell. And once all those little spots are occupied, then it sends the next signal to the next nerve cell, and that's how the chain of command is continued. But in depression, you're a little short on serotonin, so that when it squirts out, there isn't quite enough, so not enough of those receptor sites are occupied, so it doesn't send a strong signal. And that's why you get weak thought control, which then means weak mood control, and your mood goes off in directions you don't want. So then the antidepressant molecules are vacuumed up and recycled, so they're sucked back up into this little portal, and stored for the next firing. Now, what an antidepressant does is it blocks or slows down that recycling, that vacuuming, or the hoovering, depending where you're from, where it gets sucked back up into the nerve cell. Okay, so it blocks that, so it slows it down, so there's more of the droplets available to do the job, to jump across and attach. And then if there's enough of the droplets available, enough of those sites are occupied, and it sends a proper strong signal, and it gives you back thought control. That is not witchcraft. That is engineering. But here's the problem. That inlet, that little port that sucks these things back in, it has a shape, and everybody has a slightly different shape. It's like a fingerprint. All these, the little opening has a different shape for everybody, and the antidepressant molecule needs to fit into that spot, and we can't tell in advance which antidepressant is going to work with each person, because we can't tell what that shape is, what your shape is. It's trial and error. So that's why you often have to try more than one antidepressant, because you have to fiddle until you get the right fit. Okay? But usually we can. So that we have very good results. If you're patient enough to try a few different ones, it should work. Now here's something that you'll have to forgive me for, because it's very intrusive. I just hate to tell you that, but you have to face it. Caffeine makes your mood worse if you have a mood disorder. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking is, if you can't shut your mind off, which is a mood disorder, then caffeine will, because caffeine's a stimulant, it'll take anything that's going on in your body and make it faster. And so if you have a mood disorder, you can't shut your mind off from unwanted thoughts, caffeine will just make those unwanted thoughts louder and faster and more intrusive and more annoying and more depressing and more anxious. So I call a caffeinated drink anxiety in a cup or liquid insanity. And so what I learned this from patients. I mean, no one teaches this in medical school. I learned this from patients. They told me that when they had a caffeinated drink, it was as if their pills stopped working that day. So I sort of figured, well, why is that? Well, it was just that the caffeine overcame the benefit of the pills because it took the unwanted thoughts and just sped them right up. So it was like in their face. So I just took my entire practice off caffeine, which wasn't easy, I'll tell you. And people were getting better, faster on lower doses of medicines because previously I realized I was raising the dose of medicines, which of course would cause side effects, to overcome a caffeine effect. Because caffeine was making them worse, and I was over-medicating them to try to suppress it, not knowing that this was artificially maintained by caffeine. We got rid of the caffeine, people recovered faster, lower doses of medicines, fewer side effects. It got better faster. And not only that, antidepressants have a tendency over years to lose effectiveness. Like what might work really well this year, in a few years it may kind of peter out. And I found that when I got them off caffeine, the antidepressant stayed strong longer. It slowed down this deterioration process. So we had tremendous improvements by just going to decaf. Okay, decaf is fine. Regular coffee, it's a bit of a problem. Chocolate's not an issue. I mean, chocolate is caffeinated, but I just found that, it's a food group, so you can't stop it. But also, most people don't have enough chocolate to affect, it's not like a drink. A drink you can get a whole lot fast. Chocolate usually not so. But a depressed person is in the grip of an illness. So don't, because I keep running into people who say, we'll just stop thinking that. That's what they say to the depressed person. Well, just stop it. Or just stop worrying. You're not supposed to worry. But that is not very helpful advice. If a person has a chemical imbalance, they don't have that control. So to tell them to just stop doing that, or just reframe it. Okay, that's the same as telling them to go home and get taller. Just reframe your shortness. Okay, so keep that in mind that it's outside of their control, but treatment can help. So you can really assist them with a little bit you've learned tonight. You can help move people into treatment faster and more knowledgeably and assist them. But we know that all the mood disorders, they're very significant handicaps, but they're not visible because you have no idea what a person's thinking, what's going on behind their eyes. And And you have no idea how many people are getting very close to suicide, because some people still kill themselves. And so with the information you have tonight, you might just say the right thing at the right moment and save someone's life. Because I do a lot of Christian television in Canada, and I've had people write to me, and they'll just say, I was just about to kill myself at the middle of the night. They have all the pills, everything, the alcohol, everything all ready, and they're channel surfing, and they run across me being interviewed in some rerun. And they wrote to me and said, you were describing me exactly. You mean I don't have to kill myself? There's an answer to this? You know, this is something I taped ages before, and I'm sound asleep, and somebody's life is saved by just the right word at the right time. Because you have no idea what someone's thinking when you're just out socially with them, and you just might say the right thing because of something you learned tonight, and they'll just go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. You mean I don't have to live this way? And you just might save someone's life, change their mind, just with the little bit you've learned tonight. So most mood disorders are legitimate medical conditions. There's treatments. Most can be well controlled. So we need to destigmatize this, but become more informed. Because this is a condition that you have to learn how to take to your doctor. He's not going to find you. You're in control of this one. You have to assess yourself and hand the doctor the diagnosis, because he's not going to just spot you. And then 20% of the population, like 1 person in 5. So these are really common conditions. It's in all our families. And the more you know about it, the faster people will get better. You know, just think of all the people who are wearing glasses. If in the years before glasses, you know, a lot of people are running into walls. But now they don't. And so with just a little bit of information like this, you can actually help a lot of people. So with treatment, most people go back to normal. So I'm sure you all want to look like that all the time. So I've written a book, a self-assessment tool, and it's called Healthy Moods. So it's a booklet, and it's how to assess your own moods. And I use this in my clinic all the time to help people to do a self-assessment. So we provide this free for anyone who subscribes to our weekly 5-minute video. And so if you want to get that booklet, you can subscribe to the video, and we'll send you that 5-minute session every week on personal transformation. And when you get the subscription confirmation, there's a link that you can download that. So if you want that, there are subscription slips on the back table, or you can, of course, subscribe online. So we have all kinds of resources. So some are still available. The rest you can order if you like. But before we close, I want to show you this very short video, which is put out by one of the mental health organizations in North America. And it's just to point out how differently we talk about mood disorders compared to physical disorders, and how unfair the comparison is. So we're going to see if I can make it work. So it's about, what if we talked about physical health the way we talked about mental health, okay? So let's see if we can make it go.
Then I was like, yeah, right, man. Oh! Oh, my head!
Please don't complain. It'll ruin the vibe.
Just...
It's like you're not even trying to walk.
Have you ever tried not having diarrhea?
God, my migraine is killing me.
You take meds for that?
No! Oh my God, dude! I cut myself and it looks really, really bad!
Some people have it way worse than you do. You gotta chill out.
So I guess you're not going out with us tonight. Again. You're such a flake.
Oh man, I really think I sprained it this time. I gotta go see my physical therapist.
You go to therapy?
Yeah?
Whatever, weirdo.
Can you hold on 1 second?
Honestly, your attitude sucks.
Ugh.
You taking another insulin shot?
Yeah, I kinda have to.
Have you ever thought about dropping the pharmaceuticals and fighting this the natural way?
My diabetes?
Enough is enough. It's a beautiful day, man. It's time to get up.
Dude, I just got eye surgery.
Yeah, like a week ago.
Well, it still hurts.
Ooh, I think your friend hurt himself.
I need help.
Nah, he's fine.
But isn't that true? So, Josh, I'm done now. So your moods are all improved, I hope.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give a round of the hand.